The Last of Us Left Behind was a DLC released for the first game and was included with the remake earlier this year. This DLC was known for a whole slew of things: the introduction of Ellie's sexuality, a backstory that was much needed surrounding Riley, how Ellie got her bite, and so forth. Though this DLC was very short and I could have included it with my initial Last of Us analysis, I decided to just do it here since I'll be uploading a critique of the entire Last of Us story that includes all games, just so there's an ease of access. Anyways, this DLC was given a decent amount of praise, but I never seen a huge amount of praise. So in this video, we're going to see just how good the DLC is, analyzing most of the scenes and understanding what the writers and devs did right and wrong. Keep in mind, it will spoil the entire DLC, so if you haven't played it, you should probably turn away now. Also, I will not be going over combat and gameplay systems, that sort of thing, considering I already did that in my initial analysis, so go check that out if you want to. Regardless, let's get right into it. The story of Left Behind centers around the events when Joel gets impaled by a metal beam, and it's up to Ellie to figure out how to get him out of this predicament. Part of me wants to say that you should play Left Behind right before this event happens, but after some thought, I think it is way better to finish the game and then play Left Behind, since Riley isn't mentioned until the very end. After getting through the events of the base game, we see Ellie in her bed, sound asleep, until a character named Riley wakes her up by scaring her, pretending to be infected. But if I were Ellie, I would have not let this slide at all, ain't no way. But the two characters talk. It's clear that they have known each other for a while now, and I'm so glad that this game didn't do an origin story of the two and how they met. It is so much better that they started with this having some history with each other, causing questioning with the player on what their relationship actually is, what exactly happened, did it end on bad terms, how did they meet? All of those questions are good to have within a setup to a story. The Last of Us always does this so well with their time jumps. It's sort of a staple of a kind, and I love it. This is also when we get to find out that Riley was recruited to become a Firefly, which is why she disappeared out of Ellie's life. I find it so fucking weird that Marlene is willing to recruit people as young as Riley though. I get that this world is post-apocalyptic and nothing is normal anymore, but there has to be people that kept their humanity. I consider Marlene to be that person, so it's odd to me that she let Riley become a Firefly, but it's whatever, I guess. But to make it up to Ellie, Riley offers to take Ellie somewhere, to which she hesitantly agrees. But this is when the game starts to cut back and forth between the future and the present. This is when I have a huge problem with the DLC. Just to spoil a bit before we get into the actual meat of the DLC, the flashbacks are much more fun and emotional than the present time with Ellie and Joel. When the game cuts to Ellie helping Joel out of this mall, it's boring in comparison to Ellie and Riley. Mostly because Ellie and Riley have a better banter with one another. In the present time, there is no banter. Ellie only talks to herself. I just wish they would stick with telling the story about Ellie and Riley rather than interweaving it with the present day story. It feels like they didn't have enough story to go around with Riley, so they tried to mend it together with another plot that didn't need explaining to begin with. I guess you could play it off as being a mirror of Ellie. Through reliving the memories of her and Riley, she gets that same feeling when trying to rehabilitate Joel. It is a cute thing to have, but you could have also done something different that is just as memorable. The switching back and forth is also a PTSD moment maybe. I am not sure what to call it, but Riley and Ellie explore mall in this DLC as well. If there is anything to like about switching back and forth, it would be that. Regardless, the objective right now is to find first aid equipment for Joel to heal him up, and in order to do so, we must look through most of the mall. And I will say, for being a mall, this place is creepy as fuck. I was playing this late at night and my god was it frightening, especially with headphones on. When it comes to the remake, the sound engineering on this thing is just next level. The first thing you have to do, and the most logical, is to find some supplies within a pharmacy of some sort. The lack of music and the blaring ambience makes this shit freaky, though nothing of note is to find in here except a note conveniently placed that gives the code to unlock a door to the store nearby. Of course, when we unlock the door, we see an infected dead in the corner releasing spores. There are no infected in this store though. Personally, I think it was a missed opportunity to have enemies within this area, just because me, the player, was so on edge during this period. If I were to be jump scared at any time during this game, this would have been the place to do it, and it would have been genuine. What I love about the game though is the little things. I even said this in the initial critique of the first Last of Us. The little stories that are told mean so much. If you investigate the infected a tad bit more, you'll see him and his girlfriend or wife together in a picture. See, he had a life that was taken away from him. And I've been saying this for a while now. The Last of Us was never about the infected. Ever. It was about the people within the world and the stories they tell. This is what pissed me off at the reviews of the TV show on some episodes. People complained about not having enough infected. And after hearing people say that statement, I was pretty pissed. It just proves that they have no idea what The Last of Us is. Anyways, speaking of more infected, when we exit the store, we see a clicker walk past. Of course, we get a tutorial again on how to take these guys down. It makes sense considering some people will probably play Left Behind before the actual game, but it feels silly. It probably feels silly because I've played the game an unhealthy number of times. Oops. I also think it is important to tackle this right now. This DLC is not combat focused at all. There are maybe a few encounters within the DLC, but that's pretty much it, mostly involving infected, which you can get around pretty easy if you choose, and just a couple of encounters with bandits towards the end of the DLC. Do I have a problem with this? Not really. Mostly because the DLC doesn't necessarily have to be combat focused. You have the entire actual game for that. This DLC was only put out for backstory purposes revolving around Ellie. I don't think I would mind if there was no combat at all. I enjoyed my time regardless, and that's all that matters. Let me know if you think differently in the comments. Regardless, we go back into the pharmacy after finding another code that goes to a door. Once we're through it, we find a first aid kit that's empty, unfortunately. Luckily, we see a military helicopter outside of the window, and I have no idea how the helicopter is still kind of in one piece. If that thing crashed through the mall, I think there wouldn't be much left. As we head towards a flashback, we get to understand why Riley ended up joining the Fireflies. I guess since she was tailed by a certain Firefly, it led her into an ambush, which then she got dragged to an unknown location where she met Marlene. And I guess Marlene was waiting for her? I guess she expected Riley to join. To me, this plot sounds like something out of a cartoon or anime. Someone gets kidnapped by an organization, and then the leader is nice and does the cliche, "We were waiting for you." For the kind of story The Last of Us is, I don't like this. Make it more realistic. We also find out that Marlene doesn't want Ellie to join the Fireflies for some reason that isn't explained other than trying to keep Ellie safe, considering Marlene knew Ellie's mom. But the problem is they're extremely vague on how Marlene knew her mother. I understand you want to not say too much to keep the intrigue, but some explanation would have made this scenario more believable. Adding a couple more details would have been nice and not hurt the story. I think the best story element here within this portion is when Ellie mentions that she doesn't have many friends. Why is this important? It's important because it shows how much Riley means to Ellie. Riley is her only friend, her real friend, so when Riley ran away to the Fireflies, it hurt Ellie and she was alone. This makes the statement that Ellie said to Joel during the winter section have more meaning. Everyone I've met has either died or left me, everyone except for you. These little things add so much to the overall story, and after this brings us to the real thing that Riley wanted to show us, a rundown mall. But we have to turn on the power to see the real beauty. Along the way, we get some good banter in, such as the two talking about some water guns that was taken away from Ellie, taking a swig of some alcohol like any kid their age raiding the booze cabinet would do. And best of all, we see an old Halloween store that my girlfriend would probably die to see. It's so great because you get to see the relationship between the two come to light, including Ellie coming out of her shell and roaring. You can clearly tell that the two care about each other, and they're just trying to be kids in this fucked up world that they live in. Unfortunately for Riley, she got caught up in the Firefly-Fedra conflict and had to grow up even faster, and well, we know her demise. And going off being in this Halloween store, we see this magic 8-ball thing, except it's a skull. Most of the questions you ask here are representative of prior or future events that had or will happen. I'll play a couple of questions that Ellie asked just to prove my point.
Will I drive a car again? I feel it in my bones. Are we ever leaving this stupid quarantine zone? The answer is in limbo. Will we ever get our water guns back? The spirit nods yes.
I love how you can just keep asking questions over and over again, and they have to do with these events that have or will happen. It was a nice touch, but afterwards it is probably one of the most memorable events for me in the DLC, or even the game in general. And by the way, I was mad when they didn't include this in the show. It was the brick section, where Ellie and Riley have a game of who can smash all the windows of a car with a brick in the quickest time possible. And you know, I whooped Riley's ass.
Brick fucking master!
Speaking about this minigame, I think including this fought off the itch for combat. What do I mean by that? Well, considering the flashbacks don't have much combat, the minigames it includes uses the same mechanics but meshes it with storytelling. It makes it so the player forgets that combat is even a thing. It keeps that thought away, totally. This may have been people's main criticism of the DLC, but as I said before, I don't mind it at all. After you defeat Riley, the deal was you can ask her any question that you want. So I chose to ask about Ellie's mom, considering that's what I was most interested in. I wanted more information on it. Want to know what we found out? I guess Ellie's mom was a nurse, and she and Marlene used to argue a lot. That's it. Wow, Naughty Dog, way to answer my question here. That totally satiated my curiosity in Ellie's backstory. I just hope sometime in the future, whether that be The Last of Us Part 3 or Factions, we get to find out more about Ellie and her mom. I think her name was Anna, but I can't remember. But afterwards is when we turn the power on to the mall. For as realistic as The Last of Us prides itself on, there is no way in hell that the power to the city they're in is still able to run. It's very unrealistic. Things need to be repaired constantly because of how old things are. Need a lot of labor for things to stay running. It's something forgivable because we have seen power running within the base game, such as with Tommy and Maria, but the fact that this is running in a fucked up QZ like Boston, where a lot of people are corrupt and just don't give a shit about anything, it makes it, like I said, unbelievable. Anyways, a pretty heartfelt moment happens between Riley and Ellie. We found out that Ellie and Riley didn't exactly leave each other on good terms. It very much seems like, and Riley confirms this, that Riley said some stuff to Ellie that wasn't very nice to say, the least, and she states that she didn't mean any of it. What sets the scene apart from most, though, is that they don't linger on the sadness for too long, and I think this is a good thing. With Ellie being her normal self, she tells Riley that she's being a sap, with Riley reciprocating the energy. It is a conversation that young people would have. It makes the friendship seem realistic. The writers knew exactly when to go heavy with emotion and when to let off. And with my writing experience, this is something so important within storytelling. If you don't do it well, it has the potential to ruin the connection between the characters. I think I'm going to beat a dead horse here, but going back to the present still bugs me. The fact that we were going to see this big reveal of them all with the power on, but instead the awe moment is taken from us and we're sent back to present day Ellie. I just do not find the present day interesting at all, at least when it comes to the combat in the area and the exploration. Again, if this DLC focused solely on the past with Riley, it would have been a lot better in my opinion. Like, all you do here is loot, go through this admittedly scary section where you must find gas to power the area with a generator, fight off some stalkers and infected, and then you'd eventually get to the chopper where some actual first aid is found. It makes sense that the present day is filler, considering that is where all the combat takes place, but regarding story elements, literally nothing happens for the most part. Regardless, let's go back to Riley and Ellie in the past. Going through the doors, we see a powered on carousel, and let me be honest here. This is the most beautiful scene I have ever seen in the remake. Nothing from the original game beats this shot in my opinion, and I wonder what this would have looked like on the PS3 version. Let's go back to the PS3 days, man. Anyways, here's one of the first times we get to witness the innocence of Ellie. In the base game, we rarely saw that. She was hardened from her past. You could tell she has been through some shit, witnessed some horrible things. That said, horrible things haven't come quite yet, so the innocence that we haven't seen is being on display. And it's very sad. Not necessarily a sad thing that you tear up over, but a sad you smile at, if it makes sense, seeing Ellie actually happy for once. Listen, I love The Last of Us, so don't make fun of me. Though, after the carousel powers down, Riley pulls something out of her pack and it's revealed to be a pun book. I love this connection. I love how Ellie would always randomly pull out her pun book and start reading off jokes to lighten the mood. It was probably my favorite little thing in the game, so seeing that Riley was the one to make it sentimental to Ellie, wow. This is what I mean when I say a game has depth. And it sucks nowadays that most games don't have this, and I'm looking at you, Redfall. Also, if you want me to do a review of that game, I will. I am dead serious. Anyways, this is when you can just let loose all the puns you want through button prompts. Here are a few that are semi-funny.
I heard 2 peanuts walked into a park. One was assaulted. I'm reading a book on anti-gravity, and it's impossible to put down.
Nice.
Yes, that one's awesome.
After that, the whole whistle joke comes full circle when Riley does it flawlessly. This is what prompts Ellie to start practicing through the entire game. I think that is mainly what the DLC is about, connecting things. The big things, the little things, you name it. And because of that, I don't think this is your typical DLC. This isn't a bad thing, by the way. It was just a DLC to bridge gaps. and give much needed backstory. I love it. Eventually you will get to a photo booth in which you have different moods you can play with. This part isn't the most interesting thing, other than the option to push your photos to Facebook, and the characters ask what exactly Facebook is. I haven't used Facebook in years. I am getting old. But after this, you get to see the romantic tension between the two characters in an awkward way. And I have to admit, it was kind of a hard watch to see Ellie totally screw up this moment and not riz up Riley, but it was still a cute moment nonetheless that I could see from a mile away. And it feels so weird saying riz up because these characters are like teenagers. Jesus fucking Christ. But out of all the things that this DLC brings, I have to say that the part where Ellie imagines playing a game is probably the best, and is an Easter egg of sorts to the famous Mortal Kombat games you found at laundromats and arcades. In a world where kids can't be kids, this scene flips that on its head. These kids want to go out and live and be together for what feels like the final time. And considering most electronics don't work, just imagine playing a classic game like this for these characters. It means a lot to them. I just love how Riley walks you through everything. You have quick time events to complete, and at the very end, you have the option to do a finisher. Naughty Dog successfully made me have fun playing an imaginary video game inside of a video game. After this is when the heavy-hitting emotional tone comes into play perfectly. Ellie goes on this tangent about how she doesn't have any more strikes left at the QZ and that she needs to get home, that they will pick up all of this the next day. As you can assume, Riley isn't going to be able to hang out with Ellie anymore. I mean, Ellie should have known this in all honesty. Riley is now a Firefly. She is going to be moved around a lot. Ellie is a complicated character that would rather push people away than try to reconcile or talk things out. And as you can imagine, the two of them have a barrier between themselves. I love how Naughty Dog makes things feel human here. We have complicated emotions. Having a beautiful moment that switched to sadness is honestly realistic, especially for these characters that are heavily broken. And not to mention the acting that is involved here. After playing a few games after my initial review of The Last of Us and when coming back, the acting here just blows the rest out of the water. When Ellie chases after Riley is when we really understand the deeper frustrations with each of them regarding one another. In Ellie's point of view, Riley doesn't care about what Ellie thinks. For example, Riley leaves Ellie without telling her, becomes a Firefly without telling her, drags Ellie along not caring about what Ellie must do. All very valid points. Riley is frustrated with Ellie because she feels that Ellie doesn't understand why Riley did what she did and doesn't appreciate the fact that she took Ellie for a night of her life. Also a valid point. If I were to side with one or the other, it would be Ellie. Ellie is completely justified in being mad at her friend completely up and abandoning her. If I were her, I would have cut Riley out entirely. No real friend will do that to you. If they do, they don't actually care about you. But this argument is besides the point. The fact is, the points that each make is valid, but at the same time, they can't seem to solve this problem by talking. So what do? Well, Riley surprises Ellie with the water gun she talked about earlier. So they battle, and after, they will talk. Again, this is another fun minigame, but for some reason, I was complete ass for a while. I lost one round, but you know I came back with revenge. After this fun thing ends, the real deal begins. Again. I feel like I say that constantly. You can tell there's regret in her eyes saying this, but Ellie nicely says that Riley should go. The sad part is you could tell that Riley wanted her to say the opposite. I like how they say one thing, but body language says another. They did this a lot with the base game. Doing it here felt natural and made the story more engaging. It's sad to see a person you care about so deeply say the thing that you don't want them to say and vice versa. Saying the thing that you don't really want to say, it was genius when it comes to writing. Going further with that writing, after the heart-to-heart moment with each other, Riley takes Ellie's cassette player so they can play some music and dance together, building up enough courage to say how she really feels. Ellie finally tells Riley to not go with the Fireflies, and the way she delivered this line fucking broke me. The emotion that Ashley Johnson portrays here was just phenomenal. That add on the kiss. This reveal of Ellie being in love with Riley I thought was beautiful. I've talked to people that said that this was rushed, that it was badly written, and so forth, but I heavily disagree with that. This is excellent writing. I wish we had more of this in part 2. They tried to do it with Dina, but it just didn't work. But eventually, we all knew this was coming. The music blaring caused the infected to be drawn to the noise, making Ellie and Riley get face to face with danger. And then we snap right back to the present day. Here we explore the mall some more and try to find our way back to Joel. Along the way, we do encounter hunters, specifically David's men that have been tracking us since the university. One guy goes down, and that's how we end up with the bow and arrow. The same bow and arrow that Ellie shot that rabbit with.
That's the cutest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
I thought that this touch was nice to add. They didn't need to add it, but they did anyway. I enjoy it when games do this. Red Dead Redemption 2 did this so much and it brought me so much joy, and I can't wait to review that game for you guys. And pretty much this whole section revolves around trying to get around the hunters and infected. I will say the fun part about this is pinning the two against each other. But this last part of the section where you have to fight off loads of hunters and infected was absolutely crazy. When I was playing this before, I could not get through it. I was on the hard difficulty at the time and oh my god, no ammo, low health, no Molotovs, no arrows, no nothing. All I could do was knife some fools and pretend that I would be successful in stealth. I had to lower the difficulty significantly here. So with hindsight, I decided to play this through on a generous difficulty so I wouldn't have the same predicament, and I still died. Maybe it's because I'm so used to PC that when I have a controller in my hands I become dumb. Nah, I'm just cheeks at video games, skill issue. But even with the difficult nature of this section, I still loved it. I mean, I'm playing as Ellie. Although she is a capable person, she is still a 14-year-old kid going up against loads and loads of infected and hunters. It's supposed to be fucking hard. It makes sense, and for that matter, it makes my anger of dying 60 times not as painful. When Ellie unlocks the lock and opens the door, we get another transition to the past. It shows Riley and Ellie running away from infected. I will say I am a sucker for on-the-rails action sequences in games simply because it is dramatic. It feels dangerous. There's suspense on what might happen if you stop running, that sort of thing. Though I will say sometimes I wish Ellie could just run faster. I know she is a kid, but when I was 14 I damn well knew I could outrun most people, and to make this frustration worse, when Ellie tries to climb this weird thing, of course she has horrible luck and everything falls, and as you can imagine, Ellie gets trapped underneath an infected. She gets saved, but not without the bite in her arm that we see in the actual game. This is how she got that bite. Of course, she isn't the only one that was bitten. Riley has a bite on her hand as well. It is a tragedy that the best night of her life arguably has turned into a nightmare, with her life certainly ending soon. So she thinks, at least. But before we see the end, we go back to present day for literally only a minute, and it shows Ellie trying to stitch Joel's wound. One of the criticisms I've had in the base game was that they sort of made it unrealistic that Ellie could all of a sudden heal Joel up lickety-split. Here it takes away that criticism with the much needed shots of her stitching Joel and giving him first aid. What I love the most though is when Ellie tells herself to stay calm when dealing with Joel, but the scene cuts to Ellie freaking the fuck out when she got bit, smashing everything. The juxtaposition was, although on the nose, was great, and I found it something to smile at even though it was a horrible situation. Regardless, there is some beauty in this tragedy, and I think y'all know what I'm talking about. This was the same thing that Ellie mentioned at the end of the game. Riley says that they have two options. One, they can just take the easy way out. Or two, they wait it out and get infected, but they do it together. It's just the fact that these are kids, it makes it so emotional. And instead of saying everything is over at that specific point, they decide to cherish every single second that they have left. Unfortunately for Ellie, in her words, she is still waiting for her turn to die. It's heartbreaking. Knowing the backstory of Ellie and how she got that bite, you feel sorry for her. More so than you already do. After going through this tragedy, she still does her best to lighten the mood everywhere she goes. She still tells her jokes. She still tries to whistle. She gets awestruck over such small things. Knowing this, it makes this last sequence memorable. It was masterclass storytelling in my eyes. But understanding what Riley said, she takes it to heart in the present day and does whatever she can to make Joel safe, so she won't have to be alone anymore. And that is The Last of Us Left Behind. We all know that The Last of Us is a masterpiece, but Left Behind only adds onto that masterpiece with a much needed heartbreaking backstory. It gets you more invested with Ellie's character. I thought Riley was super interesting. I loved how they were the only two main characters in this story. Although I wish there was more combat here, I don't necessarily think that it was a disappointment. I think it worked with the story being told. Honestly, I think they should have focused more on the flashbacks rather than the present day. I'm also glad that with the remake, they didn't shoehorn this in during the winter section. They kept it separate, which most dev studios would not have done. I'm looking at you, Assassin's Creed 2. Regardless, here are the rankings. Last is not even close. This is when the game is nowhere near a masterpiece and should never have been part of the discussion. They need to improve on literally everything, or they should ditch the IP altogether. Next is it has potential. This is when the game has some serious positives, but ultimately the negatives outweigh them. Second best is amazing. This is when the game is amazing, good story, good combat, good everything, but it may have some bugs, hiccups in pacing, and so forth. The best is masterpiece. Of course, this is when the game is the best of the best and deserves to be in the Gaming Hall of Fame, solidifying itself as one of the best ever made. So what is Left Behind? It's a masterpiece of a DLC. I am not sorry that I'm saying this. I loved this so much, mostly because it was more story focused than combat focused. It told a beautiful, tragic, and necessary story. It did everything right here and I wasn't disappointed. I legitimately cried when I first played this DLC. If you guys have never played Left Behind, you are missing out greatly, even if it is a solid 2-hour experience. Anyways, thank you guys for watching this short video that connected all of the Last of Us games. Like I said, I will release a video that goes over the 2 Last of Us games, making it a very long video. So just imagine my first initial video, kind of remastered, recut, re-audioed, whatever, everything mixed in with the Last of Us Left Behind this video, and then the next video. So it's going to be like a straight up 5-hour video. It is not meant to be watched in its entirety in one sitting. So when that comes out, please don't like die trying to watch it. Just take some breaks here and there. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it. The next video coming out though before the entire Last of Us critique is the Jedi Survivor critique, so keep a lookout for that. I've played through it. It's a great game. Just, yeah, there is some things within it that need to be talked about, but we'll get there eventually. So have a good day, everyone. Peace out.